All right, Matt, why don't you run the numbers for the next one? And I believe
Okay.
I take the lead on this one.
Do. So this is Magazine. Their 1978 album Real Life comes in at number 272 in the 1970s on Best Ever Albums, number 23 in 1978, number 1,273 of all time. It did not make Rolling Stone's list, so this is either a 1001 album I need to hear before I die or a John special. And it's their highest rated album on Best Ever Albums as well.
Yeah, so this was on the 1,000 albums, but it also would have been one that I would have picked because it's well regarded. My first thought when I listened to this as it was going through is I was like, this is like if the Buzzcocks married New Wave. And then I realized that the guy from the Buzzcocks was in Magazine. And so I was like, well, that makes a lot of sense because it's there. This album's awesome. Like, this is a really, really good album. I love the pop sensibility on this album, but they twist it and do the bass lines are fantastic on this album. It's a great headphones album is the first take I have, because I listened to this on headphones and I even out of curiosity took the headphones off and listened to it just as is, and it lost quite a bit. And I went back and listened to the song. I broke the rule for just one song, guys, out of curiosity to do a test. But the bass lines on this album were great. I loved the tightness of the album, the pop sensibility. We had some good albums this week for pop sensibility, but there are a few albums in the 70s that I enjoyed the run of how they sounded as much as I enjoyed the first three songs on this album. Definitive Gaze, My Tulpa, and Shot by Both Sides. I loved all three of those songs quite a bit. It was a great album. The Great Beautician in the Sky was another awesome album, awesome song on this album. There's a bunch. There's not many bad ones on this. What I liked about this album was it was arty, but not so arty that it was inaccessible. It was poppy, but not so poppy that it was trite. And it was just the perfect mix of all of the elements of things that I like about 70s music, like bits and pieces of new wave, bits and pieces of both the punk and post-punk sound, pop sensibility, like you'd find the pop in, we haven't covered the Buzzcocks yet, but a little bit of what you'd hear in the Buzzcocks, right? The pop punk mix a little bit. It's also an album that I knew I was going to like from track 2, even though I wasn't familiar with, and I actually had no idea how you guys are going to feel about this album. So for right now, I'm going to kick it with the idea of revisiting it with some of the musical elements I liked a little bit later. But Matt, let's hear from you, and then I'll jump in.
Yeah, I knew none of this, and I loved all of it. And I'm with John. I think that this is this is more in line with what I was talking about in terms of it, a good melding of the art and the pop and, the kind of the avant-garde and the catchy nature of things. This really melded that well, more like something like the Talking Heads. And I found much more, compared to this with like Pere Ubu, I thought that this was a much more accessible record. There's lots of stuff going on here. There's lots of genres, and it kind of goes all over the place. Sometimes, genre switching within the same song, but I'm definitely hearing punk and new wave here, synth pop, art rock.
There's
ska,
also
seems like there's some ska in here as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
I didn't hear the ska, but I heard the saxophone, which we saw on the X-Ray Specs album last week, and I heard keyboards as well in there, and so yeah, there's a lot of, as you said, a lot more instrumentation than a traditional 4-piece or just something with synth.
Yeah, and I thought that it was into the synths. See, I think sometimes in new wave, bands, and we're going to probably see this more as the 80s comes along, I think sometimes the synths can be a very prominent instrument for a lot of those types of acts, and I found here that they played more of a complementary role. I viewed this more as still a very much kind of a band that was rooted in a traditional sense with the guitar, drums, and bass, and the synths were there, but they were kind of more of a complementary role. They weren't like, I didn't find them out in front as much or as being like the dominant instrument, and I just thought that was kind of interesting. I just noticed that throughout the record. So I would like to listen to this more. I still think that this is really interesting. It's still hard to get everything all in one take or one listen, but so I would as opposed to the Pere Ubu, this one was definitely more up my alley. So lots of different things going on. There's a song. What was it? The Great Beautician in the Sky, John, you were talking about that. That kind of comes in as like a waltz, and it's almost like I'm curious, is Josh like that? Because I was reminded of like a carnival, kind of organ thing in the background.
It just had that sound in it.
So I'm like, does Josh like this? Probably, I don't know. But the cool thing about that, it's almost like a nightmare carnival too, because it was kind of like this menacing kind of sound that was going on, but then all of a sudden they switch the time signature and they go into a more of a traditional bouncy upbeat song, so it's almost like a second song kind of tacked in on the end there. So I like it when they do stuff like that. There's some parts of this that are more upbeat and catchy. There's like Shot by Both Sides. I think that was the one that got the most listens if you look at the Spotify listens.
Great song title also.
Yeah. And that was probably the most rock and roll, like straight ahead rock song on there. So maybe that's like the most accessible one. They definitely sound British, and if the guys from the Buzzcocks, I do know that that makes sense. Obviously, they're British. So, kind of punk, kind of pop, kind of rock, kind of
psychedelic too.
Yeah,
there's elements throwback to this, and there's elements that sound like the Ramones in this too, with the throwbacks to like
I heard Pink
50s.
Floyd in here too.
Yeah.
Psychedelic, So there's a lot of stuff to go in that goes in here. There's a lot of things to like, and it certainly doesn't sound 70s. You know what I mean? Like we're starting to say that much more, and obviously that makes sense because we're coming out of the 70s here. But
it's
this
kind
sounds
of funny,
more modern too.
I was about to say it sounds 1 foot in the 60s at times, but then 2 feet in like the 80s and 90s because it. So I know what you're saying, Matt, for sure.
Yeah, they're drawing on a lot of things here. So there's tons of great stuff to like here, and it's very interesting. It mixes stuff up very well, and I'm thumbs up. I would definitely like to listen to this more.
Yeah, this is my most exciting album of the week. I really liked it too. I want to revisit it. I did hear the ska sound right at the beginning. I thought that that kind of thrown me off. And like you guys said, there's like everything in the kitchen sink in here, but not in a bad way. I liked that they weren't afraid to the piano featured prominently. I feel like if it's not piano, it's like a keyboard. They also use organ, at least in the first song, and there's horns in here as well that come about, and it's all grounded by that guitar sound. And they seem to go all over the place in terms of what type of music they want to play, sometimes within the same song like you guys play. It really kept me on my toes listening to this album, and I didn't know this band at all either. And it seems like the one word inanimate object band names always really throw me for a loop, because like with Shoes Magazine, like I never know what
Wire,
the bands are. Yeah, like what are they? Like it could be anything. So it's a good way to cover what type of music you are. It's just naming yourself like water.
Well, we're gonna do television later.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Right.
So yeah, there is to answer your question, Matt, I wasn't blown away by the carnival sounds, but that's a real minor part to this album as a whole. It was really only in that one song.
Josh, every time I hear carnival sounds, whether we're doing the podcast or not, I'm going to think of you and be like, oh, Josh would hate this.
It's accurate. And if only for that 10 seconds or whatever. And yeah, I want to listen to this again too. Did they put out more albums, or is this just kind of a one-hit?
Yeah, I think they've got 5.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because they've got 1980, there's an album, 79, 2011, there was an album called Know Thyself. And Thyself.
I don't think they stayed together, though, as a band for all of them. I'm looking at the band history right here. It appears that Howard Devoto, John McGeoch, Barry Adamson, Dave Formula, that's an interesting name, Martin Jackson, kind of at different points. So it looks like the first band lasted till about 78-ish. Then some of them stayed till about 81-ish.
81, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then a couple made an album in 82. 1, 2, 3 of the original members, it looks like. or close to original members, because Dave Formula came a little late. So yeah, there's a lot of band changes, like member changes. So the only one who seems to have been in all of them is Barry Adamson and Howard Devoto. And then John McGeoch was in all the way through 80. So there was some consistency on some of the albums. 5 studio albums and 4 live and 7 compilations. So yeah, 5 studio albums.
I feel like this is a band too that maybe a lot of other artists like on some level, or this is kind of a deep cut album. I feel like for not knowing this, and maybe I'm way off, and a lot of people know this band, but it
Duff McKagan cited Magazine's album Real Life as an influence, according to this.
Okay,
so Matt would like
Duff.
that.
Yeah. The other thing that wasn't
Johnny Marr also loves this band, apparently, which does make sense.
Right. Yeah.
And also Morrissey apparently does too. So one thing that unites the Smiths apparently is Magazine. So
one thing. Yeah. The other thing too is it kind of the moods often switch from song to song too. There's some menacing sounds in a song like Motorcade, which comes right in the middle. It's upbeat sometimes and happier at the beginning of the album in Definitive Gaze, and then so not only does it switch kind of sound in terms of what instruments they're using and stuff throughout the song, but also what they're trying to convey emotionally, which I thought was interesting.
Another fan of this band is Radiohead, Matt, and they've actually covered "Shot by Both Sides," and in particular, Tom York says the lyrical style of the group has an effect on him.
Okay,
and that's a thing. Yeah, that's a thing that I didn't pay attention to this listen. What I was really struck by the music and kind of how it shifted and changed throughout the album. So yeah, strong recommend for me on this one.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like a Radiohead song though. It's maybe like Knives Out has a little bit of a vibe on it, albeit, jittered up a little bit, but I hear a little bit of the eclecticism in a song like that. So maybe
I want to hear that cover of Shot by Both Sides by them. I wonder how that is. Are you familiar with that song, Matt? Is that on an album or just something they play?
No, that's I'm sure there's tons of Radiohead stuff out there that was never released on an album that were like B-sides or unreleased or whatever.
It says in concert they play it.
Gotcha.
So
yeah, that's live stuff. Yeah, right.
Cool. Yeah, very intriguing band for sure.
Yeah, I like this a lot. I think I might be with you, Josh. This might be my find of the week.
Yep.
So. Sleeper.
Mm-hmm.
Right, halfway home.
1001 albums before we die.
Yeah,
I know it's whenever I pick a random one in 1001, it seems to hit a little. Although Para Ubu did not hit with you guys this week, but we do seem, especially the John specials, and there is one this week that's a John special, which we'll talk about later. But